about machinery, especially that simple. So this evening is the second talk. What was the first talk?
Part 1. Meditation is action.
Meditation is action. You hear people say, sit there and turn into a vegetable. And usually it's the vegetable person who's telling you that. The person who has never looked at their mind, who just does whatever turnips do. Just grow and eat nutrients out of the soil without doing anything. Not a very good metaphor. But what I am here to talk more about and respond to questions about is what often surfaces as people's opinions about you as a meditator or about meditation. We just had someone send some kind of something from the insane asylum. I'm not sure where they were at. But they were correcting the Buddha and arguing with karma and so on and so forth. Not even worth reading. But quite often people who have never practiced sitting meditation are full of ideas about what you're doing, what you should be doing, what you could have done, what you would be more successful at doing, and how you should, and so on and so forth. And so I'm saying meditation is action. It is a very profound, albeit subtle action, very subtle. The obvious actions that are recognized in the world are football, baseball, golf.
War.
Good one. And any kind of conflict, like Michael said, war. Some kind of pushing and pulling and fighting and just carrying on and carrying on. And sports are kind of a tame form of war. It's been somewhat civilized, but it's still pretty warlike at times. You can get really hurt doing that, as you know. And I'm not against anything. Fundamentally, not even against war. You may be surprised to hear that. I'm not against, because being against anything is war. Anytime anything shows up, if you're against it, that's war. Even if it's war. Don't fight with anything. Knock it off. Stop it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't let yourself be drawn or seduced into validating some kind of negative, aggressive, harmful action towards anyone. Not a good idea. Because it is circular. What goes around, as they say, what goes around comes around. It will come back and hit you. So the idea of meditation, sitting still, and I'm not talking necessarily about not validating this because, well, you're doing a mantra, so you're doing something, or you're doing visualization, so you're doing something, or you're chanting, so you're doing something, or you're doing some kind of tantric, complicated practice of visualization in the chakra. And there are some that are extremely complicated activities that happen in the mind, visualizing the 7 chakras, having a deity in each one, each deity having a mantra going around his or her heart center clockwise, and hearing each one, hearing that mantra, repeating that mantra, sometimes many, many syllables, hundreds of syllables, long. And it's pretty active, doing something. But I'm not saying that. I'm saying the kind of practice of meditation that is taught here and taught other places also is hold very still, find a position that is symmetrical. This is the recommended mudra, hand position. Is left over right with the thumb slightly touching, forming an oval. This is stillness. Hold very still. gaze is somewhat down unless you're facing a wall, and then it's straight ahead. And just observe after you've brought everything to rest. Watch what continues to have some kind of momentum or movement to it, and usually the thought patterns, interior, but also sounds outside the building. Your own diaphragm is moving. Possibly some people are sensitive to their heartbeat. You're breathing, your blood flow, body temperature is moving or changing. And also the awareness can actively be moved all around the body. You can put your awareness in your left knee and leave it there for an hour. I'm not recommending that necessarily, but you could. And you can also move the awareness outside of the body. The awareness can leave the body. I don't know if you've had that experience or not, either sleeping or doing sitting meditation or whatever, but it's possible to do that. So quite often what happens is people want to validate. It's a very cheap credential, a very cheap way of getting, of validating something is to go into it with some kind of evidence about the outcome. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. Of course, we need to have some things happen like that. You know, if you turn the temperature up too high on something you're cooking, you can burn it. So we need to have some kind of a understanding of how that works. But the more we get away, not abandoning, but move deeper into consciousness, the less credential or results you're going to have. It's like, try to prove you had a dream. I mean, you know you had one. You absolutely are positive you had a dream, but you can't prove it to anyone. Someone could say, you didn't dream. That was your imagination that you dreamed. And you go, yeah, my imagination, I dreamed. Is it your imagination you dreamed, or did you dream you had an imagination? You know, once you get away or distance yourself from this physical, solid thing that everybody calls reality, we tend to look for results or reference points, especially the ego mind, the self-centered mind that is so concerned with how wonderful it is or how evil it is. I'm so terrible. I don't know why I do this. Here I go again doing these terrible things, having these terrible thoughts. Yak, on and on and on. We're always reifying, reinforcing the very negativity we claim to want to be rid of. We don't want that, but what do we do about it? Bitch about it. Or complain about our mind or complain about someone else's mind. It's always some kind of an antagonism or warfare trying to manipulate other stuff. Gives me COPD. Actually, no, I got COPD from smoking. Don't smoke. It's rare that I correct anybody. But Cody's kind of a nobody, so I can correct him. I couldn't resist that. I just thought it was a perfect setup. He can handle it. He's very receptive to my output. Sometimes I get kind of dyslexic about that. So returning to the topic, when you come and sit down, instead of going out and joining this or joining that or marching on this or marching on that, and again, don't misunderstand. How many times do I say this? Don't misunderstand. Because it's so easy to misunderstand. I'm not against what anybody's doing. Again, I say don't go to war. I'm not at war with anybody, any political party, any situation at all. I'm in favor of human beings. I'm in favor of living. I'm in favor of that. And sometimes the way of expressing their life is about manipulating, controlling other people, and sometimes even taking their lives. And with some kind of who knows where that justification comes from? Somewhere. Some kind of little chat they're having with themselves. So I'm saying, I'm about to say. I haven't said it yet. Sitting still in front of a wall, doing nothing, is a very profound and deep and subtle activity that you really should be doing if you intend to go out into your everyday physical life, interacting with others, your family, your friends, your enemies, your coworkers, society in general. Don't go out and interact with that and try to be good or try to be a certain way. Go out into that situation so you can be completely genuine. And if you can't be genuine if you're afraid of yourself, you can't be genuine if you're afraid of your own emotions, if you're afraid you're going to say something that you lose control or do something you shouldn't be doing or say something you shouldn't be doing. Find out who you are. Find out who this is. Find out who is this person who's been around for, 18, 20, 15, 34 years. I'm not going to say my age. 40, 50 years or a long time. Who is this person? Who fundamentally is? If you don't know who this is, then you don't know who you're taking out to, even maybe to a protest or to a rally or to the well, you know what I'm saying. Could be anything. I don't want to get into a bunch of political things. So it seems that by sitting still, call it meditation, sit still and just watch what has happened, just watch what moves. There's all kinds of things happening there. There's all kinds of activity, very subtle activity. We need to watch that and understand what that is deeply. How do you know you're understanding it deeply? Because you won't be able to describe it. How do you know you're understanding it deeply? Is because you don't have words for what you're experiencing, because your mind is becoming more and more and more subtle. You might as well do it voluntarily, because when this body goes down, which it will, pretty much a guarantee, eventually, you will be forced into that subtlety. It's called spirit world. If you don't think there's a spirit world, then you probably won't experience one for a while, until some ghost comes up and wakes you up. By the way, do you know where you're at? They have a big grin on their face. I hope you're getting scared. There's more than just this. Who you are cannot end. I don't believe that. Who you are cannot end. I don't disbelieve that. I don't need to believe or disbelieve anything. And neither do you. It's a cheap way out. Don't settle for belief or disbelief. Don't do it. You don't need that. You don't need to know whether something is true or untrue. Everything is both true and untrue. It's called not to, non-duality. It's an ancient teaching that goes back way before the time of the Buddha into the Vedas. So been around for a long time, and probably even way before that in ancient, way beyond any kind of history at all. So if you're, yes?
How is our meditation valuable to others?
Because you're not being a nuisance to them. I think it's valuable to others because if you're meditating and you're becoming responsible for your emotions, you've kind of backed off on blaming others for how you're feeling, what you're thinking, what's been done to you. Even if somebody actually comes and kicks you in the shins, like Darlene Monday did to me when I was in the 5th grade. That was her name, Darlene Monday. So even if somebody does something to you, you know your understanding is more subtle, so that you can understand that what is behind anybody's antagonism towards you is their own deep suffering. And they don't want to suffer. So what do we do with suffering? We try to get rid of it. How do we get rid of it? Well, you can blame. That tends to reduce how you feel because you're busy putting energy into the blaming. You can blame yourself. That tends to take a little bit of the heat off because at least I'm taking responsibility for why I've done it. I don't mean to be sarcastic. Yes, I do. This is why it's so important to learn, to teach yourself, to train yourself to just receive. Sit down, hold still. All the six sense fields, including the mind, should be on receive, receive. If you receive everything that's coming to you the rest of your life, this is called awakening. If you start to go out based on causes and conditions and likes and dislikes and shoulds and shouldn'ts, this is called delusion. The Buddha, when the Buddha awoke to that, that was his realization. Yes, Lisa.
Is it possible to take that attitude of just receiving out into the world?
I think it needs to start on the cushion, and at some point or points, or maybe there aren't points, something shifts. There's some kind of a shift that is not done by you. If it's done by you, this is just more ego. It's something you prepare yourself for so that the very universe, which you are not separate from, but think you are, you just get out of the way of your own self-explosion, which explodes your self-centered mind, belief in yourself into little bits. And it's something that it's like a happening, but it's not. It's like it's something that you realize it's always been that way. You've been covering it up and covering it up and covering it up. It's like someone in a room and it's been daylight for hours and hours, but have all the shades pulled and the blinds drawn, and they have a pillow over their head and a little air tube going out so they can breathe. Yes.
You said a few minutes ago that it's not necessary to know what's true.
It's not.
On the other hand, you've also given us instruction to find out the truth for yourself.
Yeah, you find out the truth that you can't know it's true.
So in this political arena that we find ourselves immersed in.
There's a political arena? Doesn't look like an arena to me.
What does it look like to you?
I pronounce it chaos. It looks like it looks like a desolation. It looks desolate.
So in the midst of all of the
desolation,
how can we find what is true?
Just look at it. Don't, and I say prematurely, it's just a way of speaking, but don't add on to things based on your hope and fear or your desperation or your panic about what looks like it's going down. Because that's what, if you look around, people are operating out of hope and fear and panic and worry and just basic insanity, self-centered narcissism, extensive narcissism. Just really intense self-centeredness. So what we can do is don't do that. And the way to don't do that is to sit down and witness your own self-centeredness so that you can see who you are, so that when you get up off this cushion or the chair, you go out into the world, you don't take a loaded gun inside your chest with you. You know, sit down and disarm. Don't do that. I'm not saying you might not need a gun. I'm not talking about guns. I'm talking about this situation, this human form, this body-mind complex. Yes, sir.
In your experience, how does Shikantaza help us to receive versus like a more esoteric or alchemically based meditation system?
Like, for instance?
Well, there's like lots of Tendai practices for Buddhism. There's Taoist practices that focus on the microcosmic orbit and things like that. So there's there's just different systems or methods.
Mm-hmm.
So again, how does shikantaza, in your experience, help the practitioner to receive?
So esoteric practices. So the esoteric practices I'm familiar with, which I've done pretty extensively, are Tantric Buddhism, specifically the Kagyu lineage of Tibetan Buddhism is Tantric. So lots of various kinds of ritualistic purifications and offerings and mantras and mudras and ritualized practices, after which one takes all of those practices and dissolves them and sits in the openness that is left after the dissolution. So as far as Taoism and Tendai Buddhism, I've not done those practices, but I would say anytime you sit down and just, you could say emphasize or allow, as another somewhat contaminated word, to just things to just come and go as they are. Then you begin to understand movement, you begin to understand how things take up a form and how they dissolve. Nothing lasts. Everything that comes together dissolves, right now or in 300 years. Anything that comes ahead is going to fall behind. So I'm not sure if that's helpful to you. A more specific question might be good if you have it.
I think you answered it.
Okay, good.
Sometimes you've used the phrase householder yogi.
Yes.
I'm wondering what the householder aspect, or what is the yogi's or the practitioner's responsibility to that relative situation?
I think it's different with each person. A householder yogi or yogini is one who makes a living, has a family, possibly even has a job, and also has a spiritual path, has forms and so on that they're using, depending on their tradition or the teaching they're endeavoring to understand. And so I think it's different. Some people need to be here. You're a monk. You needed to be here. You gave up everything pretty much in your life to be here. So someone else might come once in a while. Doesn't mean that what they're doing is less. It's just a different relationship to their karma, to their life, to how their spiritual path is opening up. And so the right and wrong part is just doesn't carry any particular weight. More?
Some of my understanding of the talk that you're giving was coming out of people wanting to be more active or engaged Buddhism.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
I'm wondering about when people's basic needs aren't met. It seems like it'd be very difficult to train the mind.
Yeah.
Is there anything we should do to help people, have their basic needs met?
So probably the very best thing you can do is train your own mind. We're not separate. I'm not into some kind of idealistic thing where we're all one and all we have to do is do this and it'll affect everyone. I'm not talking about that. But the Leviathan, or the huge, monstrous movement of history out of the ancient past into the present, has incredible force behind it and causes and conditions based on lots of passion, aggression, ignorance, hope, fear. All of those things are moving. And they're moving at a particular rate of speed, which is not particularly fast. And when you start to see aspects of that you want to help with or want to do something about, rather than jump in the way of a bulldozer, which people have done, and they died doing it. I can't remember her name, who died a number of years ago, standing in front of a bulldozer. I think it was in Gaza. And you could do that. It's not wrong to do that. It's just, and it's, I wouldn't go so far as to say that's kind of a waste or something. No, it's not. They did what they needed to do. She did what she needed to do. And what I'm saying to you is there's not too many people doing this, sitting down, holding still, face a wall, training your mind. There are so many crazy minds. Look around you. Look at the people you know. Look at your own mind. Look at when you get up in the morning. Look at what your own mind does all day long. If you're not spinning in circles, then you're going in a straight line with aggression. I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but it's. I don't understand this because I read it in a book. I understand it, which puts me in this position of talking about it because I've spent decades and decades having difficulty with my own life, my own mind, and with other people that I've been trying to help. And this understanding comes from seeing that the very best thing you can do is start with square one. Start right with yourself rather than start with what you see as a problem out there. That tends to buy into the 8 worldly dharmas of success and failure, gain and loss, life and death, all the polarities. We tend to get seduced into those, thinking there's something we need to do. And quite often we end up on some kind of mundane path. And I'm not saying it wouldn't be helpful. Being a nurse would be helpful. Being a therapist is helpful. You're meeting people where they're at to some extent. Somebody's wounded, you can help them. Someone needs some kind of support psychologically, you can help them. So I'm not taking anything away from that. I'm saying if you go out into kind of an open situation or you don't have the power of the institution with which you're connected with, then it's like someone trying to teach Buddhism and trying to get rid of Buddhism, but trying to teach what the Buddha taught and trying to get rid of the history. We don't need altars, we don't need sutras, we don't. As I've said to people who are temple residents, if we didn't have all these forms, you wouldn't stay here. You wouldn't just come in here and sit in an empty room 6.5 hours a day without some kind of structure and form around you to support you, both time forms of the Hanan bell, the sutras, the timing of the meditation, the interaction of other Sangha members, the teaching person, and so on. We need some kind of a structure for that to occur because it's such an open-ended and empty teaching. It's a teaching of emptiness, that things are empty of what we think they are. This doesn't mean they're not incredibly present. Emptiness and present. Authentic presence is not relative emptiness. Shoka. You forget?
Oh, I thought you were just calling on me to make a question.
I thought you had a question. Didn't you have your hand up a minute ago? Well, I didn't forget you had your hand up. Of course, me not forgetting you had your hand up and you forgetting the question. So, I win. Jason.
Something that you've been encouraging your students to do for a while is to watch the news and different sources of news.
A long time.
And it seems that it's really easy to watch it and then begin to speculate on what people should be doing. Or becoming paranoid about where we're going.
No kidding.
I'm wondering if it's helpful to discuss the news, or if there's a way you'd recommend looking what's going on in the world without being drawn into it.
Very good. And so look at what's going on and discuss it but limit your discussion as much as you can without being cloistered. Limit it to talking to other people who are trying to train their minds. Because if you go out into the public sphere, a discussion out there is just, if you watch the news, even very intelligent people on the news don't seem so intelligent because there's so much about right and wrong and accusing the other and so on. Not that there aren't people who are completely confused. They are, and the way they're manifesting is quite irritable at times. But they're confused. There's a confusion and a fear. They don't even know they're afraid. The way you sense sometimes someone's afraid is they're really concerned about what you think of them. That's an interesting way that fear manifests. So, yes, interaction with others, discussing it. And there's nothing wrong with complaining about what people are. I'm not saying we all need to be little angels and not, take some kind of position on it, of course, but be very aware that that's what you're doing. It's always about awareness. It's never about what arises in awareness. If it is, then we're right back to not. We're right back to not having any kind of understanding about what this is. It's not separate. And when we say it's not separate, that means everything needs to be included. And one of the ways you can do that is to see by watching things like the news or talking to people, to see the way we just exclude. Just we immediately jump on, well, that can't be, that's wrong, or that's incorrect, or really good examples of that happening all the time these days. But it was happening before the current threat of nuclear disembowelment, whatever it's on this horizon. It was happening, happened with Reagan. It happened as far as our presidents go way back. I mean, the bombing of North Korea, that's why those people are so freaked out, is because we bombed them in 1951, I think it was. Flattened them. Carpet bombing, yeah. And again, not making anyone wrong there. They were operating out of the causes and conditions that they were dealing with. But let's strengthen our minds, so let's strengthen our awareness so we can see what is true. You may need to do some things, you may not, but at least you'll act out of an awareness that is flooded your environment, so you can see fundamentally what is happening. Because if you're myopic and you're just focused on I'm right, they're wrong, we need to attack them, take them out, stop that. Like these different organizations that are rising that are just very, very warlike, even if they're on the side of so-called right. It's very disturbing to see. So yes.
How do you see what is actually occurring when everything is secondhand?
Very good. Everything is secondhand. So sitting down, facing the wall, holding still is not particularly secondhand. So start there. And then move out from there if you need to. You may not need to. You may need to. Quite often, I've said, you've heard me say this, I'm saying it again, quite often our wanting to be a value of use, of service, is more about our self-centeredness of wanting to be a person who helps rather than fundamentally wanting to help someone. Because fundamentally wanting or actually helping someone, you might not get much reward out of it. There are people who have helped other people. You never hear from them. They never say anything about it. That's happened quite a bit just recently. People who were helping, they have no idea who they were.
Can you see anything that's occurring in the world that's not secondhand, that's not...
Mm-hmm. And that's very good, because why would you act on a lot of secondhand information? You don't know what the causes and conditions of anything. You cannot find the first cause of anything, including the crazy leadership that's going on, so-called leadership. You can't see the first cause of that. So to just jump on the symptom and try to hammer away at the symptom, that's insane. It's insane to do that. I'm not saying it doesn't feel justified as we do it because we're actually hammering, but it's insane because it's just looking at a symptom. It's not dropping back down into the cause. And if you drop into the cause, you'll see that you know where that'll take you. It'll take you right back to that cushion, because there's the cause. There's the cause. You're not separate from any of that. If you think you are, you will suffer, and you'll probably cause other people to suffer unintentionally. I'm not saying we're intending it. We all want to be happy, but sometimes a lot of elbows come out when we want to be happy. Yes, sir?
When I personally get upset with an agenda, whether it's a personal agenda of somebody else or
Yeah.
media related or whatever, is that just me covering up my own issues with agendas?
It could be. I mean, just that you can say that. Is saying that there's probably some of that going on, but it also, so you couldn't say that if you didn't recognize something about that probably could be looked into deeper. Again, and I say this, would say this in lots of situations, but in your situation specifically, don't come to any conclusions. Don't turn off into a driveway just because there is one. Keep going until there isn't anything else but that. So, and that's why this practice of meditation, which comes down to us from centuries and centuries and centuries ago, is so valuable. You don't have to be a Buddhist. I'm not even a Buddhist, fundamentally. I just teach Buddhism. There isn't any Buddhist. Even this is not the Buddha. That's a chunk of wood with gold leaf on it. No, that's the Buddha. Yeah, go ahead. Bow down. Bow wow. Go ahead.
A question from Sheldon down in Union City.
Yes.
Yes, meditation seems to be an action that doesn't feel like an action. Very easy for me to exclude from all the actions that seem to get me stuff. How do I get meditation onto that list?
I wouldn't try to get it on that list. Just meditate. Keep it very simple. Don't strategize it, because it will always go in a circle, and the next thing you know, you're trying to figure out how to fill that back up again. So it's just whatever energy brought you to this computer screen, whatever energy brought you to put that message in there, that's the energy that'll bring you to the cushion. It's just this. If you think about it, it won't happen, because ego, self-centeredness, narcissism gets in there and tries to say, well, you don't really have time to do that. You really need to be doing this. You should be mowing your lawn. No, you should be helping people. Here you are, you selfish person, sitting down in front of a wall. Ugh. What would people think? Well, they'll think a lot, and they'll judge you and condemn you for even doing it a little bit. But I won't.
If a friend or family member who's a non-meditator
Yes.
is asking us or accusing us of becoming a vegetable, or saying, why are you not doing anything?
Yeah.
Seems like going into some
Explanation.
Is
Yeah, don't
helpful.
do that.
So how can we respond?
I think, and I have to give you kind of a generic answer, but I think you can extrapolate from there and maybe change it for depending on who it is and what their energy is, what your relationship is, how old they are, all the causes and conditions that arise in their eyes. You can see it. You can see what you need to say if you can remember that you need to be with them and not oppose them and not come up with arguments. Do not try to convince anybody of anything, particularly. I mean, it may look like I'm trying to convince you, and it may not, but you come in, you sit down for a Dharma talk, I'm going to talk about how I understand it. The rest of the time, I don't do much in that way. So when that person comes and actually kind of accuses you or says, what are you doing this, or what is this about, or the vegetable thing, or whatever it may be, really, and this needs to be felt. It isn't something you can kind of act out, but you need to really look at them and understand what's happening with them, why they would even bring such a thing, and realize that they're concerned about you. They're concerned about themselves too, but you could relate to their concern about you and say, be polite to them and say, I understand where you're coming from, and if you do, which you probably do, and I see what you're saying there, but this is something that's very meaningful to me and helps me fundamentally work with my feelings or emotions, or however you want to describe it. I'm sure you have a way that you can do that makes it subjective for you. You're sharing your subjectivity with them. That may not be enough to change their mind about something. They may still may be evaluating you or judging you, whatever. But they might. But you've personalized what they're trying to do to you by putting you in a category. Just that they would bring it up to you and talk to you about it. It's pretty daring, because quite often as a meditator, if someone knows you meditate, they don't want to discuss it with you. They don't want to bring it up. They're afraid you're going to try to convert them. Yeah, why would you convert somebody to something you don't like to do? Doesn't make any sense. It's like converting somebody to, occupational therapy or something. You should really try this. It's great. Anytime anybody says meditation is great, they need to meditate more. Because meditation is difficult and challenging, but it takes a while. Sometimes the first few weeks, few months, sometimes the first year or two is fairly smooth sailing. You can go along, but eventually that awareness that begins to arise unobstructed by some kind of adding or subtracting or dividing, in other words, math, eventually starts to turn around and starts to look at who you are. And that is threatening to ego. And ego wants to think, well, you know, maybe I should try that Tibetan kind of meditation, or, you know, I know, yoga. I'll do yoga. Why sit still? Maybe I should do yoga. Or maybe I should jog. That's it, jogging. I need to be in the motion because, you know, that way I'm two birds with one, whatever it is. And and jogging, that's meditation action, right? And I want to go out, I want to be in nature. Why would I ignore nature and sit in a crummy old building with a bunch of boobs? They're just sitting there looking at the wall. Why would I do that? Yes.
It often feels like I'm not able to meet someone where they're at if they're asking me questions about this, and I'm just responding out of my own discomfort.
Yes.
Is that meeting them?
Yes, it is. That's what you just have to be genuine. You don't. If you're uncomfortable, you don't have to cover that up. You can be who you are. Be genuine. People. When I say people, I'm generalizing here, but what else am I going to do? But people will. If you're genuine, people pick up on that more than are going to be more affected by that than they are going to be affected by any kind of propaganda or any kind of a justification or something. Just be genuine. Tell them you don't like to meditate, unless you really do. Not as much as you meditate. So be genuine. Say, well, I don't really care for it, but it seems to be a good, don't use my words, but, you know, if someone asked me that 30 years ago, 40 years ago, I would have said, I don't know, it seems to keep me honest to do that. I don't necessarily feel any better, but I know it's harder for me to deceive myself because no matter what I do, I'm always watching what's happening here. So it's hard for me to, I would still be a fool, but it would take me 15, 20 minutes before I realized that what I just said or did was foolish. Whereas a few years before that, it took me maybe 6 months to realize that, if ever. More? Yes.
A question from Ryan down in Ohio.
Okay. Ryan.
Can we cultivate that energy that brings us to the cushion?
A little bit, maybe. The cultivation part, I don't know so much about that, but I think just schedule yourself. Like, you know, just like we have a job or we have to go to school or we have to get up at a certain time to do this. That's why we have a schedule here. If you live in this building, you don't have much of a choice. I mean, you have a choice, you can leave, go somewhere else and live. But if you're a temple resident, then you're required to in some way relate to the forms that are here. And that might be saying, I didn't get any sleep last night, I can't come down to the forum. Then you would let in the case of our situation, the way we're structured, you would let the Eno know that you can't come down for the Hanan bell at 6:45. And the Eno would say, okay, we'll get somebody else or do it himself. Or who you just work with, you have the forum, but it's not a trap, it's not a prison. It's to help us train our minds. So that form needs to breathe, and it needs to breathe with the human beings that are trying to understand what the Buddha taught with the help of fellow Sangha, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. I have a few more minutes left if there are further questions about meditation is action. Yes, sir. Michael?
I'm wondering if the word action produces confusion.
Is it a question?
Now the question is, there seems to be two meanings, or more than one meaning to the word action.
Well, the way I'm using it is it's something you're doing, something. So the word karma is the Sanskrit, as you know, for action. So there's There's action. Produces something else, a sound, or something that appears, or something that wasn't there before. And so it's just, I think it's better to stick with just action and just keep looking at it deeper, and there's more and more of very, very simple and very subtle. When I say subtle, I mean really subtle. Right now, I want you to think, first thought, best thought, the very first thought that comes in your mind. What color am I imagining? What is it? What color?
Pink.
What is it? Anybody know? Speak up if you do.
Red.
No, it's red. That doesn't make you wrong and you right. You just had too much white in it. So what am I demonstrating? I'm saying that the action that I took there was very, very subtle. I imagined a color, and then I, came out of that and asked you a question, and then we did something there that was, not particularly entertaining, but it was just something to do. But what I was doing was very subtle. I did something very definite, completely definite. I'm sit right here, and I'm doing something very definite when I'm moving from the thought patterns that are arising. I'm moving from that thought pattern that's arising. It's moving, so I can watch it. It's shikantaza. I'm moving to my diaphragm moving. I'm moving to my breath moving. I'm moving to the train noise outside, the cardinal that's in the tree over here. And then I come back and notice that there's been a thought pattern stream that has followed each one of those things and has its own identity, its own distinct flavor, its own paper cutouts. Pardon me. So very subtle activity it starts to operate on a very, very deep psychological level, one of those not particularly accessible to someone who just thinks about this and thinks about that and thinks about this and thinks about that. So awareness. So just a flash on something, and there's a whole plethora of colors and shapes and images and so on. If you're open to that, you will be flooded by thoughts that aren't even yours, consciousnesses that are not yours. They don't belong to anyone. So I'm not promising anything. You might fall sound asleep. Michael?
I guess I was asking, you had your sports analogies. And that type of action seems that there's some kind of outcome planned.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if the action you're talking about is an action without any outcome.
Well, I think initially to meditate, we meditate with the idea of trying to become more clear, trying to see what this is. We're tired of suffering. We've tried everything else, and we're find that we just keep going in circles, and drugs don't help, and the therapist doesn't help, the psychiatrist doesn't help, nothing seems to help, and we're having this difficulty, so we maybe stumble into this and say, I think maybe I need to just look and see what this is. Maybe maybe you read a book, maybe you hear someone talk, maybe you hear someone like me talk about this, who talks out of a lot of experience. And so there may be some kind of an agenda about trying to become more clear, but then when we get into this, we realize that the whole idea of clarity, the whole thing that seems to be the stumbling block to that area is mistaken identity, thinking there is a solid being and a solid other, a solid self and a solid other, thinking there's a solid being that needs to get better, when actually there is no, what this is already without a problem. There's no problem. And seeing there's no problem is something that occurs that does not happen to someone. No self. There's no self, no other. It's the way it's described in the Yogacara is consciousness only, mind only, perception only, however you want to say it. There's just that. There's nothing being perceived, and there's no perceiver. There's just a perception. This is transcendence. If you want it, get busy. Get busy and do nothing. Not very funny, I know. That wasn't very funny, was it? Any further questions? Excellent. Thank you so much.
We'll stand and dedicate the merit that's in the back of your red chant books. And I would also like to call your attention to the donation boxes that we have in the hallway, as well as the ability to provide support for these teachings in this monastery online. Please help us as you are able. Any amount helps.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji-ho san shi pi shi hu shi son bu sa mo ku sa mo ko ja bu ro mi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions on 3 times, please hear us. Please come down, elevate, and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.